She had exactly 4 minutes before her husband traced the call. 4 minutes to disappear. 4 minutes before Detective Damian Cross, the man who smiled at crime scenes and cried at press conferences, turned his badge into a hunting license with her name on it. Serena Holloway had survived 6 years of a marriage that looked perfect from the outside and felt like drowning from the inside. Tonight, she wasn't surviving anymore. Tonight, she was running. If you've ever loved someone who slowly turned into your greatest fear, stay with me. This story goes all the way to the edge. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like, and let's begin. The 11:47 train out of Caldwell Station smelled like old coffee and diesel fuel and the particular brand of desperation that only shows up in places where people are trying to leave something behind without being seen doing it. Serena Holloway sat in the third car from the back window seat, her knees pressed together so hard they'd gone numb 20 minutes ago. She hadn't taken off her coat. The coat was a mistake, dark olive, the kind Damien had picked out for her 2 Christmases ago because he said it made her look put together. She hadn't thought about that until she was already on the platform, and by then there wasn't time to go back and change. There wasn't time for anything except moving. Her hair was different. She'd cut it herself in the gas station bathroom off Route 9, standing over a sink that hadn't drained properly, watching dark strands fall onto porcelain and feeling something she couldn't name yet. Not freedom. Not quite. Something rawer than that. Something that still had fear threaded through it like wire through muscle. The name on her ticket said Clara Merritt. The ID in her coat pocket said the same. Both were lies, and both had cost her 3 months of skimming cash from grocery runs in amounts small enough that Damien's spreadsheet, yes, he kept a spreadsheet, wouldn't flag the discrepancy. $12 here, $8 there. The accumulated residue of a woman quietly preparing to vanish. She hadn't told anyone. Not her sister in Portland, who would have panicked and called someone who knew Damien. Not the one friend from before the marriage who still texted occasionally, carefully, like someone leaving food outside a door they weren't sure would open. Not the school counselor who'd looked at Serena's wrist once during a staff meeting, in a way that said, "I see it," without saying anything at all. Because what could she say? What could any of them say? Serena had learned early that the most dangerous thing about a man like Damien wasn't the anger. The anger you could track. You could feel it building like pressure behind a wall. And when it came, it was almost a relief because at least it was honest. No, the most dangerous thing about Damien was how reasonable he sounded to everyone else. How he brought coffee to the precinct secretary every Monday. How he remembered birthdays. How he coached his nephew's baseball team on weekends and shook hands with every parent after the game. The world saw a good man. Serena had spent 6 years being the proof that he wasn't. The train lurched forward, and she grabbed the armrest with both hands, a reflex so automatic she didn't even realize she'd done it until she noticed the man in the seat beside her glance sideways, just once, and then return his attention to the window. He hadn't spoken since she sat down. She appreciated that more than she could have explained to anyone. He was somewhere in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Though something about the way he held himself made that estimate feel unreliable. He wore a dark suit that had not come off a department store rack, the kind of quality that whispers rather than announces, and he'd folded his jacket over his lap with the careful precision of someone who traveled enough to have developed rituals. No laptop, no phone visible. Just a man watching the darkness outside the window, as if he'd made an appointment with it. She wasn't thinking about him. She was thinking about the burner phone in her coat pocket, and the fact that she'd made one mistake. One small, catastrophic mistake. She'd used her real phone to text her mother. Just one once. 2 words. "I'm okay." Sent from the parking lot of the gas station before she switched phones, before she dropped the original into a storm drain on Felcher Avenue and watched it disappear. But once was enough. Damien had access to the carrier records. Damien had access to everything. Because Damien was a detective with 20 years on the force and a network of favors owed and people who looked the other way. And Serena had known all of this, and she'd texted her mother anyway because she was human, because she was terrified, because even now some part of her still needed to tell someone she existed. That was the part she was sitting with when the burner phone began to vibrate. She looked at it. Unknown number. Her stomach dropped about 6 inches. She knew. She didn't know how, but she knew. The way you know when a room has changed temperature before you can actually feel it, the way prey knows. She stared at the screen, and the phone kept vibrating, and the man beside her turned from the window and looked at it too, then looked at her. And what he saw on her face must have told him something, because his expression shifted in a way that was hard to read. Not pity, not curiosity, something more like recognition. "You going to answer that?" he said. His voice was quiet, even, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a space. "No," Serena said. The phone vibrated again. "Okay," the man said, and he looked back at the window. The phone kept going. 8 seconds. 10. She counted without meaning to. It stopped. Then, after a pause of exactly 4 seconds, it started again. Damien was nothing if not persistent. She thought about turning it off. She thought about throwing it out the window, except the window didn't open. She thought about walking to the back of the train and leaving it in the bathroom and pretending it belonged to someone else. All of those thoughts happened in the span of about 2 seconds, and none of them were good options because if she turned it off, he'd know she was dodging. If she answered, he'd hear her voice and start triangulating. The man in the dark suit watched her in the reflection of the window. She could see him doing it. He wasn't hiding it, but he wasn't being aggressive about it either. Just watching, the way a person watches someone standing too close to a ledge. "How bad?" he said, not looking at her directly, still talking to the glass. She didn't answer for a moment. "I'm sorry?" "Whoever's calling, how bad is it?" Serena looked at the phone in her hand. The vibrating had stopped again. She had maybe 30 seconds before it started one more time. "Bad enough that I'm on this train." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe don't answer it yourself." She didn't understand what he meant until he held out his hand, palm up, patient, like someone who was very used to waiting for people to make decisions. He wasn't asking her to trust him. He wasn't asking her anything. He was just offering his hand and letting her figure out what she wanted to do with that. The phone started vibrating again. Later, she would not be able to fully explain why she did it. She had spent 6 years building walls and checking exits and learning to read rooms before she entered them. She had learned to be afraid of men who offered things without explanation. And yet something in this man's stillness, the lack of urgency in his posture, the fact that he hadn't moved toward her, hadn't leaned in, hadn't done anything except hold out his hand and wait. Something in all of that made the wall come down, just for a second, just enough. She put the phone in his hand. He answered it on the 4th ring. He didn't say hello, he just waited. Whatever Damien said first, she couldn't hear from where she was sitting. She watched the man's face for clues and found almost nothing. Just that same quality of stillness, like still water over something deep. Then he spoke, and his voice had changed. Not louder, not harder exactly, but it had the particular texture of a door being closed and locked from the other side. "The woman you're looking for is no longer available to you. I'd suggest you find a different focus for your time. This call is over." He ended it. He held the phone out to her. His expression hadn't changed. Serena took the phone back with hands that were shaking, actually shaking, which she hated herself for but couldn't stop. "He'll trace the call," she said. Her voice came out lower than she'd intended. "He has people at the carrier. He's a detective. He'll know what tower." "He'll get the tower and the line of track," the man said. "He won't know which stop you leave from. By the time he narrows it down, you'll need to already be somewhere he can't reach." She stared at him. "Who are you?" He looked at her directly for the first time, and she saw that his eyes were dark, attentive, with something in them that might have been exhaustion or might have been something older than that. Someone who's familiar with men like the one who just called. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." The train was picking up speed now, and the station lights of Caldwell were falling away behind them, and Serena felt the specific vertigo of a person who has stepped off something and is not yet sure what they've stepped onto. She had planned this for 3 months. She had a bag. She had a name. She had a destination, a town 2 states over where she'd arranged to rent a room from a woman she'd found through a domestic violence network, a woman who didn't ask too many questions. She had a plan. The plan had not included this. "I need to get off at the next station," she said, mostly to herself. "I need to—" "Ridgecroft is the next stop, 40 minutes. He paused. "Does he have people in Ridgecroft?" She didn't know. That was the horrifying part. Damien had built 20 years of favors with cops across 3 counties. She had tried to plan a route that avoided his network, but she was working with limited intelligence and maximum fear, and those were not good conditions for strategy. Maybe, she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, I have a car meeting me at Ridgecroft. I can have someone intercept whatever connection you were planning and reroute your route details so nothing links back to where you're actually going. He said it the way someone describes turning left at an intersection. Flat, factual, completely devoid of drama. Or you can get off at Ridgecroft and navigate it yourself. That option is also there. You don't know me, Serena said. The suspicion was automatic, a reflex built over years of learning that offers always had a cost buried somewhere in the small print. You don't know anything about me. I know you cut your own hair in a hurry, and you've been gripping that armrest since you sat down, he said, and there was nothing unkind in it. And I know that whoever called is someone who's used to people being afraid of him. Those things are enough. That's still not a reason for me to trust you. No, he said again, with that same calm that was starting to feel either reassuring or profoundly unsettling, and she hadn't yet decided which. It's not. She looked at her hands. The shaking had slowed but not stopped. Under her left sleeve, where the coat covered it, there was a bruise she hadn't let herself look at directly since it appeared 4 days ago. She knew its shape without looking. She knew the size of it. She knew which night it was from and what had preceded it and what had followed it, which was Damien making coffee the next morning like nothing had happened and asking her if she wanted eggs. She had said yes to the eggs. She had sat across from him at the kitchen table and eaten scrambled eggs and thought about dying, and not in the dramatic way people talk about in movies. In a quiet way. In the way that comes after you've run out of other ideas. She was not going back. Whatever this was, this stranger, this train, this offer she had no good reason to accept, she was not going back to that table. Kyle, the man said. She looked up. My name, in case it helps. He paused. It usually doesn't, but people seem to want it. Serena Holloway looked at Cale Vesper for a long moment. She looked at the calm in him that didn't feel performed. She looked at the way he'd handled the call. Not aggressive, not territorial, just certain in the manner of someone who has never needed to prove a thing. She thought about Ridgecroft in 40 minutes and the possibility of Damien's people at the station and the fact that her plan was built on 3 months of careful work that had just developed a crack. Serena, she said finally. I know, he said. She blinked. How? The bag tag on your carry-on. He glanced toward it briefly. Old tag, under the new one, S. Holloway. You covered it, but the corner came loose. She looked down at the bag between her feet and felt something that would have been embarrassment under different circumstances, but right now landed somewhere closer to terror. 3 months of planning, 3 months, and she'd missed the bag tag. He'll find me, she said, and it came out quieter than she meant it. Maybe, Kyle said, but not tonight. Ridgecroft Station was a wound in the side of a hill, 2 platforms, 1 covered light, and the particular bleakness of infrastructure that exists purely for function. The train slowed into it at 12:31 a.m., and the platform was empty except for a man in a dark jacket standing at the far end with his hands loose at his sides. Not tense, not scanning, just present, the way a well-trained person is present. He nodded once at Kyle as they descended from the train. Kale nodded back. No words. The car was a black SUV with tinted windows parked at the far edge of the lot, away from the one working security camera Serena could see. She noticed that and didn't know what to make of it. She noticed the man in the jacket had positioned himself between her and the station entrance. She noticed Kyle walking slightly ahead and to her left, placing himself between her and the open road. None of it was dramatic. None of it was announced. It was just geometry. And she'd spent enough time around a man who used the same geometry in reverse, boxing her in, cutting off exits, to recognize what it meant when someone did it the other way. Your connection, Kyle said as they reached the vehicle. The woman you were going to. The room 2 states over. My team can reach out through the same network she uses. Rebook you under a different name, different route. By morning, there's no trail. Serena stopped walking. You went through my plans. I inferred your plans, based on what you told me about the carrier trace and your comfort level with the network. He stopped too, and faced her. You can walk away from this right now. There's a motel 3 blocks from this station. I can leave you with enough cash to cover 2 nights and a prepaid phone with nothing connecting it to anything. That is a real option. She looked at him in the orange glow of the parking lot lights. She looked at the motel option he'd laid out, and she measured it against what she knew about Damien, who had 20 years on the force and never let anything go. Not a case. Not a suspect. Certainly not his wife. The bruise under her sleeve pulsed once, the way bruises do in cold air. "Where is it?" she said. "Where? Your car. Where does it go?" "Mountains," Kyle said. "About 2.5 hours north. A property with significant security." "Significant how?" "Enough," he said. It wasn't a boast. That was the thing. With Damien, everything was a boast. Every accomplishment weaponized into evidence of power. This man said enough the way someone describes the weather. Serena stood in that parking lot at 12:33 in the morning with a bag she'd packed secretly over 3 months and a name that wasn't hers and a bruise that had no business being where it was. And she looked at the man who had answered her husband's call and ended it in one sentence and offered her 2 separate exits, and was now just standing there, waiting, because apparently waiting was something he knew how to do without using it as a threat. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the car. The door closed behind her and the mountain road opened up ahead, and somewhere 300 miles south, Damien Cross was already at his desk with his jaw set and his hands flat on the surface, and the particular stillness of a man whose prey has just done something unexpected. He picked up his phone. He made a call. He said 3 words to the person on the other end. "Find out everything." And in a black SUV heading north through the dark, Serena Holloway pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the distance grow between herself and every year she'd lost. And for the first time since she could remember, she let herself breathe. But what she didn't know, what no one in that car knew yet, was that Kyle's phone had already received a message from a number inside his own organization, a message that said simply, "She's with you. They know." The message sat on Kyle's phone like a piece of broken glass. "She's with you. They know." He read it twice. Then he locked the screen, slid the phone into his inside breast pocket, and looked out through the windshield at the mountain road unspooling ahead of them in the headlights. Beside him, Serena had her forehead against the passenger window. Her breathing had slowed. Not sleep. He could tell by the tension still visible in her shoulders, the way her fingers hadn't fully uncurled from the bag strap across her lap. But something close to the exhaustion that comes after the adrenaline burns out and leaves nothing behind except the raw fact of still being alive. He didn't tell her about the message. Not yet. What he did instead was angle his body slightly toward the driver, a man named Garrett, who'd been with him for 11 years, and whose loyalty had been tested in ways most people would never know about. And he said, quietly enough that it wouldn't carry, "Change the route." Garrett's eyes went to the rearview mirror for exactly 1 second. "Which variant?" "Omega." Garrett said nothing. He took the next left instead of continuing straight, and the GPS on the dashboard screen blinked twice and recalculated, and the road they were now on was narrower, darker, threading between trees that pressed close on both sides like they were listening. Kyle watched the mirrors. No headlights behind them? Not yet. He kept watching anyway. The estate came into view at 3:20 in the morning, and it was not what Serena had pictured when he'd said mountains and significant security. She had pictured something fortified, something that announced its own defensiveness. What she saw instead was a house built into the slope of the ridge, as though it had grown there, stone and timber and glass, its lines clean and severe and somehow quiet in the dark. There were lights on inside, warm and low. There were no visible guards until you looked for them, and then suddenly they were everywhere. Still figures at the tree line, one on the roof she wouldn't have spotted if the moon hadn't shifted exactly right. The car stopped. Garrett got out first. Serena didn't move for a moment. She looked at the house and then at Kyle and said, "You live here alone?" "Mostly." "That's not an answer either." "No," he said, and got out of the car, and after a second she followed. The inside of the house was warmer than the outside air and smelled like wood smoke and something clean she couldn't identify. And a woman was waiting in the entrance hall. Mid-50s, short gray hair, the posture of someone who had decided decades ago that she had no patience for anything that wasn't worth her time. She looked at Serena the way an architect looks at a structure that's been damaged by something that should have been preventable. "This is Mara," Kael said. "She runs the house." "Among other things," Mara said. She looked at Serena's coat, which was Damien's coat, and then at Serena's face, which told its own story to anyone who knew how to read it, and something in Mara's expression closed down tight and professional. "You'll want a shower, clean clothes, a doctor in the morning." "I don't need a doctor," Serena said. "That's not a question," Mara said, and turned and walked toward the stairs in a way that expected to be followed. Serena looked at Kael. He didn't offer anything with his face. She followed Mara. He waited until he heard the door close on the upper floor. Then he took out his phone and called the number that had sent the message. It rang 6 times, then voicemail. He hung up. He called again, same result. He stood in the entrance hall of his own house and felt the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. Someone in his organization had sent that message, which meant someone in his organization knew he'd be on that train, knew he'd have Serena, knew enough about the situation to flag it, which meant either the message was a warning from someone trying to help, or it was a confirmation signal that had been misdirected. He didn't know which. Both possibilities were bad. He went to his office on the ground floor and spent the next 90 minutes going through his internal communications, line by line, looking for the thread. He found 3 anomalies. He wrote down nothing. He remembered everything. Then he made another call. This one answered on the first ring despite the hour, to a man named Tobias Chen, who ran his security division and who sounded, when he answered, like someone who hadn't been asleep in the first place. "We have a problem," Kael said. "I know," Tobias said. "I've been sitting on it for 2 hours waiting to see if you'd surface." "Why didn't you call?" "Because I wasn't sure the line was clean." That hit differently than it should have. Kael sat back in his chair. "How bad?" "1 confirmed leak, possibly 2. I've isolated the communications, but I haven't moved on anyone yet because if I move too early, the others go to ground." "Who?" "I need another 12 hours. "Who, Tobias?" A pause. Long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Marcus." The name landed like something physical. Kael was quiet for 3 seconds, which for him was the equivalent of a long time. Marcus Pride had been with him for 7 years. Had been in the room for decisions that didn't exist in any official record, had eaten dinner at this house, had known Kael's sister. "You're certain," Kael said. It wasn't quite a question. 70%, that's why I need the 12 hours. "You have 8, Kael said, and ended the call. He sat in the dark office for a while after that, not thinking about Marcus exactly, thinking about the version of the world he'd believed in this morning versus the version he was sitting in now, and how quickly the distance between those two things could open up. His sister's name was Lena. She had been 24 when she died. She had trusted someone who had worn the right face for the right amount of time, and by the time the face slipped, it was already too late for her. Kael had spent the years since building something that was supposed to prevent that from happening to other people. And now he was sitting in his own house at 4 in the morning, looking at the possibility that the rot had grown in from the inside anyway. He closed his eyes for exactly 10 seconds. Then he stood up and went to make coffee, because there was nothing else useful to do right now, and useless things cost time he didn't have. Serena came downstairs at 7:15 wearing clothes that weren't hers, dark jeans, a gray sweater, both slightly too large in a way that somehow made her look more like herself than the olive coat had. Her hair was damp and she'd pulled it back. The bruise on her left wrist was visible now, a deep mottled purple-green that had no business being that color, and she didn't try to cover it. She sat down at the kitchen island and looked at the coffee Kael had left within reach, and then looked at him standing by the window. "There's a doctor coming at 9, he said. "You and Mara both say things that aren't questions. It's efficient." She poured herself coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug. Her knuckles were still showing tension she probably wasn't aware of. "I need to call the network. Let them know the reroute happened. They'll be trying to reach Clara Merritt at a destination I'm not at." "Already handled." Mara reached out at 5 a.m. Serena stared at him. "You went through my plans. You mentioned the network on the train. It wasn't a difficult inference." "Stop doing that," she said. "Stop. Inferring things about me and then acting on them without asking." He looked at her directly. You're right, he said. I should have asked first. She hadn't expected that. He could see it in the slight shift of her posture, the way she recalibrated. She'd been ready to push, and the absence of resistance made her work harder to stay steady. Who are you? She said. Actually, not the train version. Cale leaned against the counter. The morning light came through the window behind him, and he looked in it like someone who'd been awake for a very long time and had gotten comfortable with that fact. I run a private investment firm. We also operate an advocacy division that works with survivors of various kinds of institutional failure. Survivors, she repeated. People the system wasn't built to protect. That's a polished way of saying it. It's accurate. She turned the mug in her hands. He's a detective, Kyle. He has 20 years of favors owed to him across 3 counties. He's going to pull every string he has, and he's going to come looking, and when he gets close enough, people are going to help him because they always help him. That's the thing about men like him. They build the kind of reputation that makes everyone want to be the one who did them a favor. I know. I don't think you do. I've been dealing with men like your husband since before I could afford to deal with them effectively, Cale said, and something in his voice had shifted. Not harder, but denser, the way things get when they're not being performed. I know exactly what they look like from the outside and exactly what they are on the inside. I've been collecting evidence of that gap for a long time. She studied him. Why? He was quiet for a moment, then, my sister trusted a man with a good reputation. It cost her everything. He said it flat, without the emotional scaffolding people usually build around sentences like that, and that made it land heavier than it would have otherwise. So now I make it my business to make sure men like that don't get to keep their reputations intact. Serena held his gaze. She died. Yes. I'm sorry. Don't be, he said. Be what you are. Someone who got out. The doctor arrived at 9:05. Her name was Dr. Reyes. She was compact and efficient, and she'd clearly done this kind of examination before because she didn't flinch at anything, didn't editorialize, didn't ask Serena how she'd sustained the injuries in a way that put the burden of explanation back on the person who'd been hurt. She documented everything with a camera and written notes, and she spoke to Serena in the direct manner of someone who has decided that the kindest thing you can do for a person in a fragile place is treat them like they're capable of handling the truth. The bruise on the wrist was from 4 days ago. There were 2 older ones on her ribs, well on their way to fading, that said this wasn't new. There was a scar on her left shoulder that was 18 months old at minimum. Dr. Reyes wrote it all down without expression, and then she looked at Serena and said, "This is going to build a case, if you want to build one." Serena looked at the wall. He'll fight it. Yes. He'll say I'm unstable, that I fabricated things. He'll get character witnesses from everyone who's ever eaten dinner with him, which is most of the county. Yes, Dr. Reyes said again, without apology. And the documentation will outlast all of that. After the doctor left, Serena sat on the edge of the bed in the room they'd given her and looked at her own hands for a long time. Mara appeared in the doorway. She had a quality of appearing that didn't involve knocking, which should have been irritating but somehow wasn't. "Food," Mara said. "I'm not hungry." "That's irrelevant." Mara came inside, set a plate on the nightstand, and looked at Serena with those sharp gray eyes. "I've had 14 women through this house in 6 years. Different situations, different men, different damage. You all look the same on the second morning." "How do we look?" "Like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Mara sat down in the chair across the room, which surprised Serena because she hadn't struck her as someone who sat down casually. "It takes a while before you stop waiting." "Did it stop?" Serena asked. "For the others?" "Most of them." Mara picked up the coffee she'd carried in. "Not all. The ones who went back, I don't count those. That's not giving up. That's the situation being more complicated than a clean exit. But the ones who stayed out, yes, eventually it stopped." "How long?" "Longer than you want, less than forever." Serena almost laughed. It came out wrong, caught somewhere in her chest, and she pressed her hand flat against her sternum for a second until it settled. "He's not going to stop looking for me." "No," Mara said. "He won't." "So what's the plan? I just live here in the mountains and wait for Kyle's lawyers to fix everything?" "The lawyers are already working. 3 of them, as of 6 this morning. They're pulling his internal affairs record, which apparently is longer than the public version." Mara set her cup down. But you're right that it won't be simple. Men with his kind of network take time to dismantle. It's not a switch you flip. He could show up here. He could try. That's not the same as being safe. No, Mara agreed. It's not. Serena looked at the window. Outside, the mountain ridge was gray-green under a flat autumn sky, and there were no sounds from outside that didn't belong there. No traffic, no sirens, no footsteps outside a door. She was aware, in a way she hadn't been in years, of what silence actually felt like when it wasn't loaded with something. Why does he do this? Serena asked. Kyle, he doesn't know me. This costs him something. Mara looked at her for a moment. Ask him, she said, and stood up. Eat the food, she added, and left. The afternoon passed in a strange suspension. Kyle's legal team arrived, 2 attorneys and a paralegal who set up in the library and began going through records with the focused efficiency of people billing by the minute and meaning it. Serena sat with them for 2 hours and told them things she had never said out loud in sequence before. Dates, locations, the name of the hospital she'd driven herself to 18 months ago and lied to about the source of the injury. The names of 2 colleagues who'd noticed things and looked away. It was like draining something infected. Painful coming out, necessary. Kyle checked in twice. He didn't hover. He asked 2 direct questions each time, got her answers, and left. She noticed he was on his phone almost constantly, speaking in low tones to people she couldn't identify. And there was something in his posture during those conversations that was different from how he held himself at rest. Tighter, more controlled, the way a person looks when they're managing something they haven't told anyone about yet. She noticed it. She filed it away. Tobias Chen arrived at 4 in the afternoon. He was younger than Serena expected. Late 30s, lean with the kind of watchful face that processes information faster than it reveals it. He and Kale went into the office and closed the door, and the conversation that followed was quiet enough that she couldn't make out words, only the rhythm of it, which was tense and low, and had the cadence of 2 people who disagreed about something and were trying not to let it turn into the wrong kind of argument. She was passing the hallway 20 minutes later when the door opened and Tobias came out first. He looked at her without expression, said, "Ma'am," in a flat courtesy tone, and went toward the front of the house. Kyle came out after him. He looked at Serena in the hallway, and his face gave her less than usual, which she was realizing meant the situation was worse than usual. "What happened?" she said. "Nothing you need to worry about right now." "Stop doing that," she said, and her voice had an edge she didn't try to soften. "Stop deciding what I need to worry about. I have been making decisions about what I can and can't handle for 6 years while someone else decided that for me, and I am done with that. Do you understand?" He looked at her for a long moment. The hallway was quiet. Then he said, "We may have a breach inside the organization." "How bad?" "Bad enough that I've already changed our security protocols twice today." He said it evenly. "Someone may have passed information about your location to your husband." The word husband landed the way it always did, like something with a barb in it. "May have. We're still confirming." "If they did," Serena said slowly, "then he knows where I am." He would know the general area, not the specific property layout, not the security systems. Yet, Kale agreed. She stood in the hallway of a stranger's mountain house at 4 in the afternoon and felt the trap she'd been trying to escape reshaping itself around her from a different direction. She thought about the train. She thought about the bag tags she'd missed. She thought about all the ways that careful plans were only as good as the people who helped you execute them, and how people were the most unpredictable variable in any equation. "I want to know everything you know," she said. "Not summaries, not the version where you decide what's appropriate. Everything." Kale studied her. She watched him calculate something. "All right," he said. He told her about the message on the train. He told her about Tobias and the 70% certainty and the name he hadn't shared yet because saying it in this hallway made it real in a different way. He told her about the 12 hours that had now become 8, that had now become 4. He told her all of it, flat and direct, and without the softening that people usually used when they were delivering bad news to someone they thought needed protection. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Marcus?" He went still. "How do you know that name?" "You said he knew your sister." She looked at him. "You had a picture on your desk." In the office, when I walked past this morning. A group photo. 3 men and a woman. You're in it. She looked like you around the eyes. And one of the men in the photo had a name badge from a company that doesn't exist on your current staff list. I noticed the gap. She paused. Marcus Pride. I looked him up on your internal directory while I was waiting for the lawyers. Cale stared at her. Not with suspicion. With something more like recalibration. You're not what I expected, he said. I've been surviving a detective for 6 years, Serena said. I notice things. It's how I'm still alive. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, if Marcus has been feeding information to Damien, it means your husband has had a line into this operation since before you arrived. She worked that through, which means he knew you'd be on that train. Cale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Yes. Which means Damien didn't accidentally find me tonight. He orchestrated it. He let me run. The realization moved through her slowly, and then all at once, the way cold water does. He let me think I was escaping, and he put me in a car heading for the one location he already had eyes inside. The silence between them was thick and specific. He's not just trying to get me back, Serena said. Her voice had gone very quiet. He's trying to destroy you. I'm just the tool he's using to get close enough. Kyle didn't deny it. He looked at her with those dark, exhausted eyes and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. And somewhere south of the mountain, in a room Serena had never seen and never wanted to see, Damien Cross laid a folder on his desk and opened it to a page of architectural schematics. The layout of a property in the Northern Ridge Mountains, obtained from a source who'd had access for 7 years. And he pressed his finger to a point on the diagram and said to the man standing across from him, Here. When the time comes, here. When the time comes, we go in through the east wall. Damien Cross said it the way he said everything, with the patience of a man who had decided a long time ago that the world moved at whatever speed he chose, and that waiting was not weakness, but a kind of weapon. He pressed his finger flat against the schematic and left it there. And the man across the desk, a former officer named Briggs, who had learned early that Damien's favors came with long lifespans and his enemies didn't, looked at the diagram and said nothing because he'd learned that too. Damien lifted his finger. There was a faint grease mark on the paper where it had been. He looked at it for a second, then closed the folder. How long before the team is ready? He said. 48 hours, Briggs said. Maybe 36 if the equipment clears. 36, Damien said. Not a question. Briggs left. Damien sat behind his desk in the dark of his home office, the same desk where he'd filed tax returns, and coached his nephew over the phone and written commendation letters for officers he was simultaneously blackmailing. And he sat very still, the way he always sat when he was working through something he hadn't finished yet. He thought about Serena in that house. He thought about Cale Vesper, whose name had appeared in 3 separate investigations Damien had quietly buried over the past 4 years, because Vesper was the kind of man who collected leverage the way other people collected furniture, and he'd needed to wait for the right opening. He thought about the look on Serena's face the last time he'd seen it, that particular blankness she'd developed over the years, the way a person looks when they've stopped believing their expression matters. He had not loved her. He knew that now with the clarity that comes when something stops being useful. What he'd felt for her was closer to ownership, which was not the same thing and never had been, but it had taken her disappearing for that distinction to fully arrive. She was the centerpiece. That was all. The case he was building against Vesper needed a human element, a victim, a narrative the press could follow, a woman who could stand in front of a camera and say he took me from one dangerous man and made me a prisoner of another. Serena didn't know that yet. He was looking forward to the moment she figured it out. He opened the folder again, pressed his finger to the east wall. 36 hours. Inside the mountain house, Kyle stood in his office with the door closed and the lights low and his phone face down on the desk. And he thought about Marcus Pride with the specific kind of grief that comes not from losing someone, but from realizing you never had them the way you thought you did. 7 years. 7 years of meals at this table, of shared history, of decisions made in rooms that no one else would ever know about. He thought about the night Marcus had held him together after Lena died. Genuinely held him together, said the right things, stayed the right amount of time. He thought about whether any of that had been real or whether it had been the long opening move of something that was only now reaching its conclusion. He couldn't know. That was the thing. You could never go back and find the exact moment a person had decided to become something other than what you believed them to be. The decision itself left no mark. Only the consequences did. Tobias knocked twice and came in without waiting, which was the arrangement they'd had for years. "It's confirmed," Tobias said. He looked like he hadn't slept and wasn't going to apologize for how that looked. "Marcus has been in communication with someone in Damian Cross's network for at least 14 months. Encrypted channel routed through 3 relays, but we broke the last layer an hour ago." KL absorbed this without moving. What did he give them? Security protocols for the east and north perimeters. Staff rotation schedules for the past 8 months. The safe room location. That last one landed differently than the others. The safe room was not on any public schematic. It was not in any document that existed outside of a conversation between Kyle, Tobias, and one other person. Kyle had designed it himself, off the books, after Lena. It was the one place in this property he had believed was uncompromised. "Who else knew the safe room location?" he said. Tobias's jaw moved. 3 people. You, me, and Marcus. Kale stood very still. Then he said, "Where is he?" "That's the other thing." Tobias put both hands flat on the desk, which he never did, and Kale recognized it as the posture of a man delivering news he'd been dreading. "Marcus left the property at 6 this morning. I thought it was routine. He had a supplier meeting scheduled for noon in the valley. But he didn't make the meeting. His car was found at the Ridgecroft train station 2 hours ago. Engine cold, burner phone on the seat. He's gone. He's gone." The silence between them was the kind that had weight. "The second leak," Kyle said. "You said possibly 2. Who's the second?" Tobias straightened up. He looked directly at Kyle, and what Kyle saw in his face was the particular expression of someone about to say something they would have done anything to avoid saying. "Lydia Marsh." Kyle didn't move. "Say that again." "Lydia Marsh, head of internal communications. She's been with you for 4 years. Kale's voice came out flat. "I know how long she's been here. She wasn't working with Marcus. Different channel, different handler. She was being blackmailed." Tobias said this part carefully, the way you say things when you want them to land with accuracy rather than judgment. "Her brother. He's got a narcotics charge pending in Mecklenburg County. Someone in Cross's network was holding it over her for the past 7 months." Kale pressed the knuckles of one hand against the desk surface. Not hard, just pressure. Something to push against. "She didn't come to me." "She couldn't. They told her you'd be notified and she'd lose her brother. She should have come to me." "I know," Tobias said. "She knows that now. She came forward herself. An hour ago. That's how we confirmed Marcus. She had documentation." "Where is she?" "In the east sitting room. She's—" Tobias paused. "She's not in good shape." Kale breathed in through his nose, slow, and out again. He thought about Lena. He always thought about Lena when something like this happened, which was not a conscious choice, but something his mind did without permission, threading the new loss through the old one like a needle finding the same hole. He thought about the east wall schematic in Damian's hands. He thought about Serena upstairs, who had figured out Marcus's name from a photo and a gap in a staff directory, and had survived 6 years of a man whose entire craft was control. "Lydia's brother," he said. "The narcotics charge. Handle it." Tobias blinked. "She betrayed the... She was coerced. Handle the charge." He picked up his phone. "And get me a full security rewrite. Every protocol Marcus had access to gets rebuilt from the floor up, starting now. The safe room relocates tonight. That's a 12-hour operation minimum. Then start now so it's done in 12 hours. Tobias left. Kale stood alone in the office, and the anger was there. He could feel it in his chest, dense and hot. But he had learned a long time ago that anger in the moment of crisis was a luxury that cost you more than it was worth. He put it somewhere internal, somewhere it could burn without consuming anything useful. He went to find Serena. She was in the library, which surprised him. She had the legal files spread in front of her. The attorneys had left copies, and she was going through them with a red pen, annotating margins in her precise teacher's handwriting. the kind of handwriting that had spent years correcting other people's grammar in red ink and was now turning that precision onto the documentation of her own abuse. She looked up when he came in, and she read his face immediately, the way she'd learned to read faces. "Tell me," she said. He did. All of it. He stood across the table from her and laid it out in sequence. Marcus, Lydia, the safe room, the schematic, the 36-hour window he estimated based on what he knew about how Damien operated. He watched her face while he talked, and she didn't look away, didn't look down. And when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "He planned this," she said, "from before I got on that train." "Yes." "He knew you'd be there." "Yes." "He's been building a case against you, using me as, what, leverage? Evidence of kidnapping?" "Most likely," Kael said. "A narrative where I extracted you from your marriage under false pretenses and have been holding you here without your consent. It would dovetail with a broader corruption investigation he's been positioning himself to lead. Taking down my organization would make his career bulletproof for the next decade." Serena set down the red pen. She looked at it on the table. "So I ran from a trap and ran straight into a bigger one." That's one way to characterize it. How would you characterize it? He thought about it honestly. You made the only decision available to you with the information you had. The trap was designed specifically to look like a safe exit. That's not your failure. She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to go talk to Lydia." "That's not a question," she finished. "I know." She stood up. "She was coerced. I understand coercion better than anyone in this house. I'd like to talk to her." He stepped aside. Lydia Marsh was 31 years old and looked at this moment closer to 45. She was sitting in the east sitting room with her hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold and her eyes tracking the middle distance in the way of someone whose mind is working through the same calculation on a loop and coming up with the same answer every time. She looked up when Serena came in, not at Kael, who followed and stood in the doorway, at Serena, and what moved across her face was the specific expression of someone who understands they are being looked at by the person they've wronged most directly. "They told you," Lydia said. "Yes," Serena said. She sat down across from her and didn't perform warmth she didn't have, and didn't perform coldness she also didn't have. She just sat. "Tell me about the brother," Lydia told her. It took about 8 minutes, and it was ugly and specific in the way that coercion always is. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just a series of very small moments in which a person trades one piece of their integrity for one extension of the deadline, and then another, until they look up and realize how far they've walked from who they used to be. The charge, the phone call, the first piece of information she'd pass, just a staff schedule, just something small, and how they'd used it to take a photo of her handing it over, so that now she was not only compromised, but documented. "Marcus," Serena said when Lydia finished. "Did you know about him?" "Not until yesterday," Lydia said. "I thought I was the only one. That's how they made it work. I thought if I was the only source, the damage was limited. I thought—" She stopped. "I thought a lot of things that weren't true." Serena looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Where's your brother now?" "He's in holding. Kael's handling the charge," Serena said. She said it simply, like a fact, and she saw Lydia's face fracture briefly before the woman pulled it back together. "You should know that." Lydia looked at the cold tea. "I don't deserve that." "No," Serena said. "Probably not, but the situation does." She stood up and went back to the doorway where Kael was standing, and she looked at him and said quietly, "The east wall. If that's where he's coming in, we need to know it before he does." He looked at her carefully. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that the only thing more dangerous than an ambush is an ambush that walks into a counter-ambush." She kept her voice low and steady. "He has the schematics." "Fine. What if the schematics are wrong by the time he uses them?" "You want to reset the board. I want to make him think he has an advantage he doesn't have." Something moved in Kael's face, not quite surprise, but a close neighbor of it. "You've done this before. I've survived a man who tried to control every variable for 6 years," she said. "The only way I survived was by making him think he controlled variables that I'd already moved." He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, I need to make a call, and you need to come with me. The next 4 hours were the most concentrated of Serena's life since the night she'd packed her bag. They moved the safe room, such as not just its contents, but the physical designation of it, the protocols attached to it, the route that the household staff had been trained to use. They rewrote the north and east perimeter schedules so that the rotation Damien had in his files now described a vulnerability that would, in fact, describe a kill zone. They pulled 3 external security contractors that Marcus hadn't known about and integrated them quietly into the property's structure. Tobias ran it. Kale directed it. Serena sat at the table in the operations room, a room she hadn't known existed until an hour ago, behind the library wall, and she read through everything they were building and she asked questions, sharp and specific questions, and nobody told her she didn't need to worry about this. At 10:15 that night, Kyle got a call from one of his attorneys. He took it in the hallway and came back 3 minutes later, and the expression on his face was the first one she'd seen from him that she couldn't fully read. "What?" she said. "Damien Cross filed an emergency missing persons report 2 hours ago. He's named me as the primary suspect in your disappearance." He said it with the controlled flatness of someone holding something back. "He's called in a federal contact. There are investigators being mobilized." "He's using the law as a battering ram," Serena said. "Yes." "How long before they can move on us?" "Legally, 48 to 72 hours to establish jurisdiction. Get a warrant." "And illegally?" Kyle looked at her. The operations room was quiet except for the distant sound of Tobias's team moving through the house. 36 hours was my estimate for his private operation. It may be less now that he's using the legal route as cover. The federal investigation gives him a reason to be in the area. It gives his team cover to move without looking like what they are. Serena did the math. The security rewrite was 12 hours. The legal response from Kyle's attorneys was slower than that. The federal jurisdiction question meant the next 36 hours were the window, the only window, where everything was in play and nothing was decided. She thought about standing in a gas station bathroom, cutting her own hair. She thought about the bag tag she'd missed. She thought about 6 years of eating eggs across from a man who had decided she was a prop in his story and had built an entire architecture of power around that decision. She thought about what Mara had said. Eventually, it stopped. "He's going to come himself," Serena said. "Not a question." "Why do you say that?" "Because the missing persons report is personal. He could have sent someone, but he filed it himself in his own name. He wants to be here. He wants to be the one who finds me." She looked at Kyle steadily. "This was never about me. You said that. I think you were right. But he still wants to be in the room when it ends. Men like him always do." Kyle was looking at her with that dense, unreadable attention. "You're not afraid," he said, and there was something in his voice that wasn't a statement and wasn't quite a question. "I'm terrified," she said. "That's different from not knowing what to do about it." Outside, the mountain dark pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the tree line, one of the security contractors was moving through underbrush with equipment that cost more than most people's cars. Somewhere south, a man with a folder of architectural schematics and 20 years of law enforcement behind him was putting on his coat and telling Briggs 36 hours. And inside the operations room, Serena Holloway picked up a red pen, her pen, the one from the library, which she'd carried with her without thinking. And she leaned over the redrawn property schematic and said, "Show me where the east wall connects to the ridge. If he's coming from that direction, there's a natural choke point here." She pressed the pen tip to the paper. Kale leaned in beside her. They were two people who had come to this moment from opposite directions and through entirely different kinds of loss, and they were both still standing, and that had to count for something. But at that exact moment, a sound came from the upper floor of the house. A crash. Then silence. Then Mara's voice, sharp and stripped of its usual control, calling down the stairwell. "Kyle!" Just his name. Nothing else. But the way she said it turned Serena's blood cold, because in all the hours she'd spent in this house, she had never once heard Mara sound like that. Kyle was moving before the echo died. Serena was 3 steps behind him. They took the stairs fast, and at the top of the landing, one of the new security contractors was down on one knee, with his hand pressed to the side of his head and his earpiece hanging loose. And the door to Serena's room, the room they'd given her, with the window that looked out over the north ridge, was standing open and the window glass was gone, and in the cold air pouring through the empty frame, there was nothing except the mountain dark and the sound of something moving fast through the trees below. Tobias appeared from the east corridor, gun drawn. "We've got a breach," he said. "North perimeter. Someone got through the old rotation." "The old rotation," Kael said. His voice had gone to something Serena hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, not fear, but something colder than either. "Marcus." "He didn't run," Tobias said. "He went ahead. He's been here for hours." Serena stood in the doorway of her own emptied room and looked at the broken window and understood, in that complete and total way that leaves no room for alternate interpretations, that Marcus Pride had not simply leaked information to Damian Cross. He had come back to make sure the plan succeeded from the inside, and he had been in this house, moving through it, learning the new layouts, watching, while they had spent 4 hours believing they were the ones setting the trap. The 36-hour window had just become no window at all. Kael turned to her in the hallway, and he said one word, quietly, with the precision of someone who has run out of margins. "Now." The word hung in the air for exactly 1 second. Now. Then everything moved at once. Tobias was already on his radio, voice dropped to the clipped shorthand of someone who'd trained for this. "Alpha Team North Perimeter, Code Black, all units converge on the ridgeline. Do not wait for confirmation." And the contractor on one knee in the hallway was pulling himself upright with one hand against the wall, the other pressing his earpiece back in, his face tight with the particular expression of a man who is furious at himself and converting it directly into function. Kael moved to the window of Serena's room and looked out into the dark without leaning too far into the frame. 30 seconds of looking. Then he stepped back. He went down the north face. There's a natural trail 20 meters east of where the glass went. He knew it was there. "Because Marcus showed him," Tobias said. "Because Marcus walked him through this property tonight while we were downstairs rewriting the schematics he'd already given away." Kyle turned from the window. His voice was completely level, which was the thing Serena was learning to read as the most dangerous register he had. Not the quiet of someone who'd given up, but the quiet of someone who had narrowed everything down to a single point. "He's a scout. Cross's team isn't here yet. He came to confirm the new layouts." "Which means he's going back out," Serena said. Both men looked at her. "He came in, he saw the changes, and now he's leaving to report them." She was standing in the doorway with her arms at her sides and her voice steady in a way that surprised her, because her heart was doing something violent inside her chest that had nothing to do with steadiness. "If you let him get out, Cross has current intelligence in the next 2 hours. If you stop him before he clears the property." "Cross comes in blind," Tobias finished. "We need him before he hits the tree line," Kael said. He looked at Tobias. "Take the east exit, loop the ridge. Garrett takes the south trail. I'll take north direct." "You're not going out there alone," Tobias said. "I'm not discussing it." Kael, 8 minutes, Kael said. "If he makes the tree line and gets to a phone, we lose the advantage." 8 minutes, Tobias. He looked at Serena. The look lasted less than 2 seconds, but it carried more than most conversations did. "The operations room. Lock it from inside. Don't open it for anyone until you hear my voice." "And if I don't hear your voice?" He didn't answer that. He moved past her and she felt the air shift in his wake. And then he was gone. And Tobias was gone. And the hallway was empty except for the contractor whose name she didn't know and the sound of boots moving fast somewhere below. She stood in the doorway of her empty room for exactly 4 seconds. She counted them. 4 seconds of looking at the broken window and the mountain dark beyond it, and the cold air moving through the empty frame like something that had been waiting for this exact opening. Then she went downstairs. Not to the operations room. She went to the library. Mara was there, standing with her arms crossed and her face doing the thing it did when she was managing something large and internal. She looked at Serena coming through the door and said, "He told you to go to the operations room." "Yes." "But you're here." "Yes." Mara looked at her for a long moment. "What do you need?" "The perimeter layout. The real one, after tonight's rewrite, not the version Marcus saw." Mara crossed to the desk without another word and pulled a tablet from the drawer and handed it to Serena. "You're going to tell me what you're thinking." "Marcus knew this house," Serena said, pulling up the schematic on the tablet. "He knew it well enough to come in through the north window without triggering the primary sensors. That means he used a route that predates tonight's security rewrite. She traced the north face on the screen. If he went in through here, he has to come out somewhere on the east side to get back to wherever his transportation is. The north face drops too steeply on the other side. There's no clean exit there. Mara looked at the screen. The East Service Road. Where does it connect? Half a mile out, there's a fire access road. Runs parallel to the main approach. Mara's finger moved on the screen. If he has a car staged... He has a car staged, Serena said. Marcus spent 7 years working for a man who plans every variable. He didn't come in here without an exit. She looked at Mara. Is there a faster route to the fire road than the one Tobias is taking? Mara's eyes narrowed. There is. Through the equipment shed on the south side, there's a maintenance path. Cuts off 6 minutes. Show me. You are not Mara. Serena's voice came out with an edge she hadn't planned and didn't apologize for. I have been managed and decided for and protected and contained for 6 years. I understand that everyone in this house is trying to do the opposite of that, and I'm grateful for it, I am, but I need you to understand something. She looked at the woman directly. If Marcus gets off this property tonight, Damian Cross walks through that door with federal cover and 36 hours of current intelligence, and this entire operation comes apart. Everything Kyle built. The case against Damian. All of it. She paused. I am not going to sit in a locked room and wait for someone else to decide whether my life continues. The silence was short. Equipment shed is unlocked, Mara said. Maintenance path runs northwest. Keep the tree line on your left. Stay low where the path drops. There's a sight line from the ridge that the new cameras don't cover yet. She reached into the desk drawer and put something on the table between them. A compact handheld radio, already on frequency. Tobias's channel. You listen only. You do not transmit unless you have no other option. Serena picked up the radio. Thank you. Don't thank me, Mara said. Come back. The maintenance path was exactly as described and nothing like walking it in the dark with the mountain cold pressing through the sweater. She hadn't thought to change, and her breath coming in visible puffs that she tried to keep controlled, tried to keep quiet, because sound traveled differently out here than it did in buildings. The path dropped and rose in a rhythm that her body learned after the first 100 meters, and she kept the tree line on her left, and she kept moving. And through the radio, she could hear Tobias's voice giving quiet direction codes to his team, and Garrett's voice confirming positions, and nothing from Kyle, which could mean anything. She heard Marcus before she saw him. A branch. One snap, then the careful silence that follows it. The silence of someone who has heard themselves make noise and is now compensating, which is its own kind of signal. She stopped on the path and pressed herself against the tree line and waited. Because she'd learned from 6 years with Damian that the wrong move when you think you're hidden is the only move that matters. He came out of the underbrush 12 meters ahead of her, moving fast but not running. The controlled, quick walk of someone who is trying to look purposeful rather than panicked. He had a phone in his hand, the screen dimmed but visibly active, and he was heading toward the fire access road with the directional certainty of someone who'd memorized his exit route. Serena looked at the radio in her hand. Tobias's channel. She thought about transmitting. She thought about Marcus reaching that fire road and driving away with everything he'd seen tonight, and the window of advantage closing down to nothing. She thought about Kyle on the north face in the dark. She stepped onto the path. Marcus. He stopped. Completely. The way you stop when you hear your own name where it shouldn't be. He turned. And she saw his face clearly enough in the ambient light that leaked from the house above. Older than the photo in Kyle's office. Harder around the eyes, but recognizably the same man who had stood in a group photo with his hand on a younger woman's shoulder, who had sat at this house's table and eaten meals and held things together after grief. He looked at her with an expression that ran through several things very quickly. Surprise, then calculation, then something she could only describe as professional regret. Mrs. Cross, he said. Holloway, she said. It was always Holloway. He looked at the radio in her hand, at the path behind her. He was doing the math, the same math she was doing, and they were both arriving at the same answer, which was that they were alone on this path right now, and the nearest team member was 2 minutes out at a run. You should go back inside, he said. You should stop moving toward that road, she said. He looked at her steadily. He was a large man, trained, and she was a woman in a borrowed sweater on a dark mountain path. and they both knew what the physical arithmetic looked like. She saw him know it. She watched him decide something. "I don't want to hurt you," he said, and she believed him, which made him more dangerous than if he'd been lying. "Then stand still," she said, "and let me ask you one thing." He didn't move, which was either compliance or him buying the same time she was buying. "Lena," Serena said. Something happened in his face, a small involuntary thing, like a crack forming in something that had been under pressure for a long time. "He told you about her," Marcus said. "He showed me a photo. You were there. After she died." She kept her voice flat, kept the distance between them exactly as it was. "Was any of that real? Or were you already working for Damien by then?" The silence lasted long enough that she had to resist the urge to fill it. "I was already working for him," Marcus said, and his voice had changed. The professional register had dropped out of it. What was left was something rawer, and she filed that away because rawness was something she knew how to work with. "But that night was real. That part was real." "Then you know what you're doing," she said. "You know who you're doing it for." "Damien Cross doesn't care about you, Marcus. He doesn't care about anyone he uses. You are a tool with a shelf life, and when the shelf life runs out, I know what he is," Marcus said, and there was something in it that surprised her. Not defensiveness, but a kind of exhausted acknowledgement, as if he'd been having this same argument with himself for a long time and had stopped expecting it to resolve. "Then why?" He looked at her for a long moment. The mountain was very quiet. Somewhere above them, she could hear the faint crackle of Tobias's team moving through the underbrush to the east. 2 minutes ago, less now. "He has something on me that ends everything if it comes out," Marcus said. "Not money, not a charge. Something that—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," Serena said. "It's the only thing that matters, because it's the reason you're out here on this path instead of sitting at a table you've had a place at for 7 years. Whatever he has on you, you know it's already over, right? You know the moment Kyle confirms the breach, there's no version of this where you walk away clean. Damien doesn't care whether you make it to that road or not. If you make it, he uses what you found. If you don't, he finds another way in and you become evidence he burns." Something in Marcus's expression shifted. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. It shifted the way things do in real life, which is slowly and incompletely, and with a lot of residue of the previous position still visible. "You're trying to talk me down," he said. "I'm trying to tell you the truth," Serena said. "I've had a lot of practice with men who decided I wasn't capable of handling the truth. I'm choosing not to do the same thing to you." He stared at her, and in that stare was something she recognized. Not because she'd seen it in a mirror exactly, but because she'd felt its interior equivalent. The specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding a position for so long, they've forgotten what it cost them to take it. He didn't move toward the road. He also didn't move away from it. And then the tree line 15 meters to the east exploded with light and motion as Tobias's team came through the underbrush. 3 people in tactical gear with flashlights cutting across the path. And Marcus made a decision in the fraction of a second those decisions get made in. He bolted. Not toward the road. Sideways back into the underbrush, moving with the speed and direction of someone who knew this terrain better than Tobias's team did and was counting on that gap. Serena hit the transmit button on the radio. "He's in the underbrush east of the maintenance path, heading toward the ridge junction. He's not going for the road." Tobias's voice came back immediately. "Copy. Garrett, cut the ridge junction now." She was still standing on the path, her heart doing something she could feel in her back teeth, when she heard the shout from the ridge. Garrett's voice, a sharp command, then a sound that might have been a scuffle or might have been something worse, and then silence, and then Garrett again. "We've got him." She let out a breath that felt like it came from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Then the radio crackled again, and it was a voice she hadn't heard on it yet. Kyle's voice, from somewhere on the north face, and it was tight in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "Tobias, we have a problem." "Marcus is contained," Tobias said. "Not Marcus," Kyle said. "Look east, the road." There was a pause of 3 seconds. Then Tobias said, very quietly, "That's not authorized federal movement." "No," Kyle said. "It's not." Serena turned and looked east, and through the gap in the tree line she could see it. Lights. Multiple sets of lights moving up the fire access road in the dark, not with the urgency of an emergency response, but with the patience of a convoy that knows it has time, that has been waiting for exactly this moment. No sirens. No markings she could see from this distance. Damien hadn't waited 36 hours. He hadn't waited 12. He'd used Marcus's window of entry not as a scouting run, but as a distraction. Something to pull the security team's attention inward while his convoy took the access road from the east. The whole thing. The breach, the chase, the radio traffic, all of it had been noise designed to keep them looking at the wrong direction while the real approach happened outside the perimeter entirely. She heard Kyl's boots on the path before she saw him. He came out of the north trail moving fast and controlled, and when he saw her standing on the maintenance path instead of the operations room, his face did something brief and complicated that she didn't have time to read. "I told you," he started. "I stopped Marcus," she said. "You can be angry about it later." He looked at her. "Are you hurt?" "No." He looked at the lights on the access road. His jaw was set in a way that pulled the skin tight across his face, and she could see him working through the tactical situation in real time, revising and discarding options with the speed of someone whose mind had been built for exactly this kind of calculation. "We can't hold the perimeter against a convoy," he said. "It wasn't defeat, it was assessment." "No," she agreed. "The safe room is relocated. They don't have the new location." "But they have the old protocols," Serena said, "which means they know how the household responds to a perimeter breach. They know what patterns to expect." "Which means we don't follow the patterns," Kyle said. "What do we do instead?" He looked at her on the mountain path in the dark with the lights coming up the east road and the cold air between them, and he said, with the particular intensity of someone saying something they mean all the way down, "We let them in." She stared at him. "Explain that." "He wants to find you. He wants to walk into this house and make the arrest and have it documented. If we disappear into the safe room, he has 4 hours of search time before his federal contact can get a warrant, and he'll tear this property apart in 4 hours. But if he walks in and finds exactly what he's looking for, me," Serena said, "and every camera in this house running," Kyle said, "and 3 attorneys on a live feed from a server he can't touch, and whatever he says in this house tonight on record." He paused. "He's been building a narrative where I abducted you. The only way to destroy that narrative is to let him walk in and demonstrate in real time who he actually is." She understood it. She understood it completely, and the understanding sat in her chest like something cold and necessary. "You're using me as bait." "I'm offering you the choice," he said. "That's different." He looked at her steadily. "If you say no, we go to the safe room right now, and we hold for the warrant timeline. That option is real." The lights on the access road were closer now. She could hear engines. She thought about 6 years. She thought about the eggs. She thought about the attorney who had looked at her bruise documentation 2 hours ago and said, "This is going to build a case." She thought about Damien's folder and his finger on the east wall schematic and the 36 hours that had turned into no hours at all. And she thought about what it would mean to spend the rest of her life knowing she'd had one moment to end this completely and had chosen a locked room instead. "Where do you want me?" she said. Something moved through Kyl's face. Not relief exactly, more like recognition. "The main sitting room, the one with the north-facing windows. There are 4 cameras in that room that look inactive and aren't. And you?" "I'll be close," he said. "How close?" He looked at her directly. "Close enough." They went back into the house through the equipment shed entrance, and the first thing Serena noticed was Mara in the entrance hall, directing 2 staff members with the precise efficiency of a person running a controlled burn. Remove this, relocate that, everything unnecessary away from the primary rooms. Lydia Marsh was somewhere Serena couldn't see. The contractors had collapsed inward, taking positions that looked like withdrawal and were actually enclosure. The convoy reached the outer gate at 4 minutes past midnight. Serena heard the gate go. Not an explosion, a precise mechanical defeat of the electronic lock, the kind of defeat that required specific knowledge of how the lock was designed, which meant Marcus had passed that too, or someone else had. She stood in the sitting room with its north-facing windows and its 4 cameras that looked inactive and weren't, and she breathed through the fear that was doing something seismic in her chest. And she looked at her own hands and watched them not shake, and was surprised. The front door opened. not broken, opened from the outside with a code that should have been changed and hadn't been changed because changing it had been item 7 on the security rewrite list, and they'd reached item 4 when Marcus had gone through the window. Footsteps in the entrance hall, multiple sets, but one set that moved differently than the others. Slower, more deliberate, the walk of someone who is exactly where he intended to be. Damian Cross appeared in the doorway of the sitting room. He was in civilian clothes, not uniform. Dark jacket, open collar, the careful presentation of a man who wants to look like someone coming to help rather than someone running an operation. He was flanked by 2 men she didn't know, both large, both with the stillness of people who get paid to stand in rooms like this. He looked at Serena. She looked back at him. 6 years of marriage collapsed into the space between them like a structure that had been structurally compromised for a long time and had finally found its moment to fall. He looked. She searched for the word satisfied. Not angry, not relieved. Satisfied the way a person looks when a plan arrives at its conclusion. "Serena," he said. His voice was the same voice that had said good morning across a breakfast table for 6 years. Warm, reasonable, the voice of the good man everyone else believed in. "Damien," she said. He took a step into the room. "I've been worried about you." She said nothing. "The man who took you." Damien looked around the room, as if just now noticing Kyle wasn't visible. "He's been manipulating you. I know it doesn't feel that way, but—" "He didn't take me," Serena said. "I got on a train." Damien's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The warmth didn't disappear. It adjusted. The way it always adjusted, recalibrating around the obstacle, finding the new angle. "You weren't yourself after everything." "I was exactly myself," she said. "That was the problem." He looked at her steadily, and she could see him calculating, reading the room, reading her posture, reading the absence of fear he'd been expecting to find, and the presence of something else he hadn't prepared for. "Where's Vesper?" he said, and the warmth had dropped maybe 10%. "I'm here," Kyle said. He came from the east corridor, not the main entrance, a direction that put him between Damien's 2 men and the door, and she watched both men register this and decide whether to react, and decide not to yet. Kale looked exactly as he had on the train. Same quality of stillness, same density of attention. Nothing performed. Damien looked at him with the specific expression of a man who has been preparing for a meeting for a long time and is now in it. "Kyle Vesper, you're not a federal officer," Kyle said. "Your contact hasn't arrived yet. The warrant you're operating under is for a welfare check, which doesn't give you entry authority over private property. Everything happening in this room right now is being recorded and transmitted to 3 independent servers and 2 attorneys who are currently awake and watching." He said this the way he said everything, without drama, without heat, just the facts laid out in sequence like items on a table. "So I'd encourage you to think carefully about what you say next, Detective." Damien's jaw moved. Once. "Serena," he said. And now the warmth was gone entirely, and what was left was the thing she'd spent 6 years learning to recognize. The flatness that preceded the turn. The particular stillness that was not calm, but its opposite. "Come with me. Now." She looked at him across the sitting room of a house she'd been in for less than 48 hours, across 6 years of mornings and evenings, and all the geography of a life she'd been shrinking to fit inside someone else's idea of what she should be. And she felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite freedom, but was somewhere between them. Somewhere that felt very much like the thing that comes after you've finally stopped being afraid of the thing you're afraid of. "No," she said. The word was 1 syllable, and it landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples from it moved outward through the silence. And Damien's expression did the thing she had spent 6 years dreading. It closed down completely, went flat and certain and irrevocable. And his right hand moved toward his jacket, and Kale moved at the same instant from the east corridor, and one of Damien's men stepped forward, and everything in the room arrived at its collision point simultaneously. And Serena did not move back, did not step away, did not make herself smaller the way she had learned over 6 years to make herself smaller. She stood exactly where she was and watched it happen, and the gunshot came from Damien's left, not from his hand, from the man beside him, the larger one, who had made the decision in the half-second of chaos that followed Serena's refusal. The sound in the enclosed sitting room was enormous and wrong, the kind of sound that rearranges the architecture of a moment permanently, and Kyle went down on one knee in the east doorway, with his hand pressed to his left side and his face doing nothing dramatic, just tightening, the way a face does when the body receives information it wasn't ready for. Serena did not scream. She had screamed before, in other rooms, in other moments of violence, and she had learned that screaming was what happened when fear occupied the entire body and left no room for anything else. Fear was present. It was absolutely present. It was enormous. But it did not occupy the entire body. Something else was there too, something that had been building for 48 hours, or possibly 6 years, and had arrived now at a place that felt less like courage and more like the absolute end of available options. She moved, not toward Kyle and not toward the door. She moved toward the fireplace mantel to her left, where Mara had placed a specific item that afternoon during the security rewrite. A small remote transmitter, the kind used to activate the emergency broadcast to all cameras simultaneously. And she hit it with her palm as she passed it and then kept moving, putting the large sofa between herself and Damien's second man, who was tracking her with the slow confidence of someone who doesn't believe the person they're tracking is a genuine threat. That was the miscalculation. Tobias came through the north window, not the broken window from Serena's room, the sitting room's own north window, the one that looked out over the ridge, the one Kyle had specifically positioned him outside of 20 minutes ago when they'd been building the plan that Serena had agreed to. The glass gave in the specific way of glass that has been pre-scored from the outside, a sound like a single sharp intake of breath, and Tobias was through it before the second man had fully turned, and what followed was fast and ugly, and not like the movies at all. It was close and grappling, and the second man was large and trained, and Tobias was neither larger nor more trained, but he had the advantage of direction, and the second man went into the wall hard enough to take the fight out of him, not finished, but interrupted. The first man, Briggs, she would learn his name later, turned toward Tobias. Serena picked up the lamp from the side table and hit Briggs across the back of the shoulder with it. It wasn't effective in any movie sense. The lamp was lighter than she'd expected, and the blow landed wrong, but it was enough to pull his attention, and that 1 second of pulled attention was what Tobias needed to close the distance. Damien had not moved. That was the thing she registered with the part of her mind that was running below the chaos, the part that had spent 6 years studying him. He had not moved. He stood in the center of the sitting room and watched what was happening around him with the calculating stillness of a man who was already revising his plan, already finding the new angle, already looking for the variable he could still control. The variable he could still control was Kyle. Kyle was still in the east doorway, still on one knee, his hand still pressed to his side. He was conscious, and his eyes were tracking, and when Damien began to move toward him, she saw Kyle see it and try to stand and not quite make it. His left leg wouldn't take the weight the way he needed it to, and he went back down, and his face did something that was the closest thing to fear she'd seen from him, and it wasn't fear for himself. Damien. Her voice came out clear. She didn't know how. It came out the way a voice comes out when there's nothing left to protect that matters more than what you're about to do. Look at me. He stopped, looked at her, and in the sitting room, with its 4 cameras that looked inactive and weren't, with Tobias and Briggs still working it out on the floor behind him, and the second man halfway to recovered against the wall, Damien Cross looked at his wife with the full weight of everything he was, and she looked back with the full weight of everything she'd survived, and the distance between them was maybe 8 feet, and felt like a different measurement entirely. "This is on camera," she said. "I know," he said. "Everything you've said tonight, everything you've done." "I know," he said again, and the thing that made her chest tighten was that he didn't look afraid. He still looked like himself, composed, calculating, the good man making a reasonable assessment. "You understand that won't matter, Serena. I have 20 years of... You have 20 years of other people protecting you," she said. "And right now, every single one of those people is either in this room or on a recording that's already left this property." She kept her voice flat. She kept her body still. She was aware distantly of Kyle behind Damien pulling himself upright against the doorframe with the specific determination of a man overriding what his body is telling him. Marcus is contained. Briggs is on the floor. "Whoever you called at the federal level, Your attorneys are already countering the warrant. Wilshamers. She paused. It's over. Damien looked at her for a long moment. The lamp was still in her hand. She hadn't noticed she was still holding it. You were never going to stay, he said. And for the first time in 6 years, she heard something in his voice that was neither warmth nor flatness, nor the practiced resonance of a man performing reasonableness. It was something smaller and uglier, the residue of something that had maybe, somewhere at the very beginning, been real before he'd built all the other architecture around it. From the beginning, you were always looking for the exit. You built the exit, she said. Every time you raised your hand, you built it. Something moved through his face, brief and involuntary, and then gone, locked back behind everything he'd constructed over 20 years of professional performance. He reached into his jacket. Cale said, "Don't." One word. From the doorway. His voice had the particular texture of a man working through significant pain and refusing to let it affect the output, and the word landed with enough weight that Damien's hand stopped moving. The cameras are live, Cale said. Your hand is on camera. Whatever you're reaching for is on camera. Think about what your hand does next. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted. Damien's hand came out of his jacket empty. Tobias was on his feet now, Briggs secured behind him with zip restraints from his jacket pocket, and the second man by the wall had made the decision that men make when the math has shifted past a certain point, and was standing with his hands visible and his face showing the careful neutrality of someone cooperating. 3 of Cale's external contractors came through the front door 30 seconds later, and then it was simply a matter of physics. Too many people in the room whose interests did not align with Damien's, and gravity pulling everything toward its natural conclusion. When the county sheriff's deputies arrived 45 minutes later, called by Cale's attorneys, not by Damien's federal contact, which was a distinction that would matter enormously in the weeks that followed, Damien Cross was sitting in a chair in the sitting room with his hands in his lap and his expression doing the last thing Serena would have predicted. He looked tired, not defeated, not ashamed, just tired, the way something looks when it has been running on maintenance power for a long time, and the maintenance power has finally run out. She watched them take him out of the room, and she felt nothing clean. That was the honest truth of it. There was no catharsis, no wave of relief, no moment where the music would have swelled if there had been music. There was just the specific, complicated weight of something ending that had been very large in her life for a very long time, and the particular silence of a room where a significant thing has happened, and the people left in it are still working out what it means for them going forward. Mara appeared at her elbow, with a blanket that Serena hadn't known she needed until it was around her shoulders, and she stood in the sitting room and watched the deputies move through the house and didn't say anything for a while. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after the deputies. Cale resisted it, which surprised no one. He sat on the front steps of the house. He had made it to the front steps under his own power, which was an act of will over body that the paramedic who eventually examined him described as deeply inadvisable. And he let them work on him with the stoic acceptance of a man who has decided that cooperating is faster than arguing. The bullet had passed through the left side, below the ribs, missing anything immediately fatal in the particular way that luck sometimes decides to function. It had done damage. It would require surgery. He would be in a hospital for at minimum 5 days, probably more. He looked at Serena when she came outside and sat down on the step beside him. The ambulance lights were painting the mountain air red and white in alternating pulses. "You hit Briggs with a lamp," he said. "It didn't work very well," she said. "No," he agreed. But the intention was correct. She looked at the driveway where Damien's convoy vehicles sat with their doors open and their lights still on, abandoned in the specific way of things that were brought for one purpose and ended up serving another. "He's going to fight it," she said. "Even now. He'll hire people and build a defense, and he'll be very convincing to people who want to be convinced." "Yes," Cale said. The recordings, the medical documentation, the communications we pulled from Marcus, Lydia's testimony, the 14 months of encrypted messages between Marcus and Damien's network contact. He can fight it. He will fight it. He paused, and she could hear in the pause the effort it took him to speak evenly right now. He won't win it. She looked at the mountain in the dark. The first gray was beginning at the edge of the sky. Not dawn yet, but the suggestion of it, the light that comes before the light, and is its own particular kind of promise. Your sister, she said. He was quiet. What was she like? The silence lasted long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, stubborn. Funnier than she let most people see. She used to correct my grammar. A pause. She would have had a great deal of opinions about this week. Serena looked at him. He was looking at the sky the same way she had been, and she understood that they were two people looking at the same horizon from different distances of loss, and that the distances were not the same, but the direction was. I'm sorry about her, Serena said. I know, he said. The paramedic appeared and told Kyle in the specific tone of medical professionals who have stopped asking and started informing that they were leaving now, and he was coming with them. Kyle looked at Serena one more time before he stood. The house is yours, he said, for as long as you need it. I know you don't need it, he said. That's not why I'm offering. She looked at him in the ambulance light with the mountain behind him and the sky going gray above it, and she thought about the train, about the 4 minutes, about the bag tag she'd missed, and the text she'd sent her mother, and all the ways that the careful plan had been imperfect, and how the imperfections had led here, to this step, to this conversation, to a man who was bleeding from a wound he'd taken standing between her and a door. Go, she said. I'll be here when you get back. He went. The weeks that followed were not clean. Nothing about the reconstruction of a life after that kind of violence is clean, and anyone who says otherwise has never done it. The legal proceedings were exactly as complicated as Kyle had predicted, and Serena had feared. Damien's attorneys were expensive and practiced, and they built a defense with the craftsmanship of people who had done this before, which they had. The narrative shifted and recalibrated, and the press coverage ranged from accurate to deliberately distorted. And there were days when Serena sat in the mountain house and watched the news cycle chew through the facts of her life and felt something that was indistinguishable from nausea. But the recordings held. The medical documentation held. Lydia Marsh sat across from investigators and told them everything, not because she had been forgiven, she hadn't entirely, and she knew that, and she carried it, but because it was the only honest thing she had left to do. Marcus Pride, in the particular calculus of a man who understood that the leverage Damien held over him had expired the moment the operation failed, cooperated in exchange for a negotiated outcome that was neither just nor entirely unjust, but was real. The communications between Damien's network and the corrupt officials who had enabled him across 3 counties created a secondary case that was, if anything, larger than the primary one. Damien Cross was suspended from the force within 3 weeks, indicted within 8. The character witnesses showed up because he had been right that they would. The baseball team parents, the precinct secretary, the people who'd eaten dinner with him. They showed up and they said what they believed, which was true, and none of it was enough, because the evidence was the evidence, and the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually even the most compelling performance runs out of audience. She watched his sentencing on a screen in the library of the Mountain House, alone, because she'd asked to be alone. And she felt still not clean. That was still the truth. She felt the complicated residue of having been very close to a person for a very long time, even a person who had done what he had done, and discovering that the residue doesn't resolve itself neatly just because the right outcome has arrived. She felt something that was adjacent to grief for the years, not for him, but for the years themselves, and she let herself feel it because she had learned that trying to skip that part only relocated it somewhere less accessible and more durable. Then she closed the screen and went to the kitchen and made herself a cup of coffee, and she stood at the window looking at the mountain in the afternoon light, and she noticed, without deciding to notice, that the bruise on her wrist had been gone for weeks. She looked at the skin there, clean and ordinary, and she stayed with that for a moment. Then she went back to the library, and she opened the notebook she'd started 3 weeks ago. Not a journal, not exactly, though it had some of that quality. It had started as notes for the attorneys and had become something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. She picked up the red pen, and she kept writing. Cale came home on a Thursday, which was an ordinary day in every way the weather could manage. Overcast, quiet, the particular stillness of a mountain in autumn that has run out of dramatic things to say. He moved carefully, which he would for another 6 weeks, and he did not make the carefulness into anything larger than it was, which she appreciated about him because she had spent too long around a man who weaponized every vulnerability he displayed. She was on the back terrace when he arrived. She heard the car and heard Mara's voice inside and heard nothing from Garrett because Garrett was constitutionally incapable of unnecessary sound. She stayed on the terrace. She thought he would come to her when he was ready, and if he needed to sleep first or eat first or sit in his office with the door closed and re-enter his own life in whatever sequence made sense to him, she would be here when that was done. He came out 20 minutes later. He had changed out of travel clothes, and he moved with the careful economy of a man monitoring his own body, and he sat down in the other chair, the one that had been unoccupied since she'd started sitting out here in the mornings. And he looked at the mountain the same way she looked at it, which was the way you look at something that has been present for a significant experience and carries the association of it now, whether it asked to or not. "How did it go?" she said. Meaning his recovery, meaning the hospital, meaning all of it. "It went," he said. She nodded. "The sentencing," he said. "You watched?" "Yes." "Are you all right?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she answered things anymore. "I'm something," she said. "I'll let you know when I figure out what." He almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him, and it was brief and incomplete and more real for both of those things. They sat with the mountain in the gray afternoon light, and she thought about a train and a phone call and a sentence spoken with the certainty of someone who believed the words he was saying, and she thought about what it had cost him to believe them. Not just this week, not just the bullet, but the 7 years of Marcus and the 4 years of Lydia and the accumulated weight of building something in the name of someone you'd lost, and then watching the building develop cracks. "I've been writing," she said. He looked at her. "Not for the case, something else." She looked at the mountain. "About what it's like, the specific texture of it, not the violence. There's enough written about the violence. The other parts, the eggs in the morning, the way you learn to read the air pressure in a room before you walk into it, the things that look like nothing from the outside." "For whom?" he said. "I don't know yet. Someone who needs to know they're not the only one who's noticed those things." She paused. Someone who's still trying to figure out what to call what they're living in. Kyle was quiet for a moment. "That's important work," he said. "It's the work I have," she said. Mara appeared in the doorway behind them and looked at Kyle with the specific assessment of someone determining whether he'd overdone the day, decided he had, and was calculating how to address it without losing the argument. He looked back at her with the awareness of a man who has long since accepted that some arguments are not worth the energy. "There's food," Mara said. "There's always food," Kyle said. "That's because I make it," Mara said, and went back inside. Serena stood. She picked up the coffee cup that had gone cold while she sat, and she looked at the mountain one more time. The way you look at something you're not leaving but are nevertheless completing a moment with. And she thought about the word home and what it had meant for the past 6 years, and what it might mean now, and how the distance between those two definitions was the distance she'd traveled to get here. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Cale looked up. "On the train. When you answered the phone." She held the cup with both hands. "Did you know? What you were doing, what it would turn into?" He thought about it the way he thought about things, all the way down, without rushing the answer toward the light. "I knew it was significant," he said. "I didn't know the shape of it." "Were you afraid?" "Of what? Of—" She stopped. She was trying to find the honest version of the question and not the easy version. "Of taking it on, whatever it was, when you didn't know yet." He looked at her directly, those dark attentive eyes that had looked at her the same way since the train, since the first moment, and said, "I was more afraid of what I'd become if I didn't." She held that. She turned it over. She looked at the mountain. "I'm not going back," she said. "To the town, to the school, to—" She gestured, meaning the whole life before, the shape of it, the address. "I know," he said. "I don't know yet what I'm going toward," she said. "I just know I'm not going back." "That's enough," he said. "For now. That's enough." She went inside to find Mara and the food that was always there, and Kyle stayed on the terrace a few minutes longer, and she didn't watch him from the window because he was entitled to his own relationship with the mountain and the afternoon and the complicated accounting of the week. But she was aware, in the way you're aware of weather that has changed while you weren't looking, that the quality of the space inside the house was different now. Not warm, exactly. Not safe in the simple sense, because she didn't believe in simple safety anymore and suspected she never would, but occupied, present. The particular feeling of a space where things have happened and the people those things happened to have decided, without announcement, to continue. Weeks became a month. The legal proceedings ground forward in the way legal proceedings do, slow and grinding and requiring constant attention, the way chronic things do. She drove into the valley twice a week to meet with the attorneys. She taught, for 3 weeks, a literature course at the community school in the nearest town, standing in front of 12 adults who had come on a weeknight to talk about books, and discovered that the thing she'd been afraid she'd lost, the ability to stand in front of a room and make language matter, was still there, stripped down and less decorated than it had been before, but more honest for the stripping. She published the first piece in the spring, not in a literary magazine or a newspaper. She posted it through a network connected to the advocacy division Kael's organization ran, the one that reached people who were in the middle of things, not the aftermath. She wrote about eggs, she wrote about the air pressure in a room, she wrote about bag tags and gas station bathrooms, and the specific kind of planning that happens in $12 increments over 3 months. The response was, she hadn't been prepared for it. Not the volume of it, and not the texture of it. The messages that came back through the network were from people who were still in it, people who were circling exits, people who were sitting across breakfast tables from someone whose reputation didn't match their interior, and what they said, in different words and different languages, and from different continents, was some version of, I thought I was the only one who noticed that. She read all of them. She answered what she could. One evening in late spring, she and Kyle ate dinner on the back terrace, which had become a habit without either of them deciding to make it one. And after the food was done, she put down her fork and said, I want to talk about what this is. He looked at her. This, she said, and gestured between them, and she was aware that the gesture was imprecise, but trusted him to understand that she was being imprecise on purpose, because precision would require a category, and she wasn't ready to assign a category yet. I don't have a map for this. I had a map for the before, and it was a bad map, and I burned it, and I don't have a new one. Neither do I, he said. She looked at him. That's not reassuring. He said it without irony. No, probably not. He looked at the mountain, which was green now in the late spring light, and said, I have never been good at the thing where you tell someone what they want to hear in order to make the moment easier. I'm telling you I don't have a map because I don't have one, and because I think you'd know if I was pretending otherwise, and because you've had enough of that. She held his gaze for a long time. Okay, she said. Then we don't have a map. We know the direction, he said. What direction is that? He looked at her with the specific attention that had been the same since the first moment, that hadn't changed with the gunshot or the legal proceedings or the months of complicated aftermath, and said, Forward. She picked up her fork. She finished her food. The mountain held the last of the evening light the way mountains do, longer than seems reasonable, the light hanging in the upper air after it's already left the ground, as if it can't quite bring itself to go. She was not healed. She knew that. Healing was not an event you cross the finish line of, and anyone who'd been through something real understood that, and she'd been through something real. There were mornings when she woke up in this house, and her body performed the old calculation before her mind came online, reading the air, tensing for the sound of footsteps, waiting. The waiting was the thing that lasted longest. The absence of danger did not immediately teach the body that danger had become an absence, but there were also mornings, increasing in frequency, when she woke up and the calculation didn't come first. When the first thing was the light on the mountain, or the sound of Mara in the kitchen, or the notebook on the nightstand with its growing density of pages, or the particular quality of quiet that comes from an absence that is genuinely empty rather than loaded. Those mornings were not the majority yet. She thought they would be eventually. She thought eventually was the most honest word available to her right now, and she had decided to respect honesty more than comfort, which was either wisdom or stubbornness, and she didn't yet know which. She picked up the red pen. She opened the notebook. Outside the library window, the mountain was doing what it had been doing since before any of them existed and would continue doing after, being itself, indifferently, magnificently, without asking anyone's permission. She looked at it for a moment the way you look at something that has witnessed you without judging you, and then she looked at the blank page and she wrote the first line of the next piece, and it was about a train, and a phone call, and a stranger who answered it, and the particular sentence that had changed the direction of everything, and how one sentence said with enough certainty to the right person at the right moment could be the difference between a cage and a door. She kept writing. Outside, the mountain kept being what it was, and in the room down the hall, a man who had decided that protecting people was the purpose he'd built his life around was asleep for the first time in weeks, without listening for something to go wrong, and somewhere south in a facility that held men who had believed their reputations would protect them forever. A decorated detective sat in a room that looked like every other room and had no window and no spreadsheet and no one to bring him coffee on Monday morning. And none of it was clean, and all of it was real. And the page filled up, one sentence at a time, the way lives do when you've decided to keep living them.